Look, I believe it in hashtag 039's sentiment because, as we all know, it and hashtag 039's only regarded when you reach that frightening 5% barrier in 10 years. This increases pressure, much to the risk premium evaluation rationale for TAC. There is jitteriness even if it ISN and hashtag 039's necessarily inflationary, it and hashtag 039's mainly due to positive job numbers and other factors. It and hashtag 039's nearly 2 cams, and I and hashtag 039v seen it hearing from investors, particularly at CES last week. Fundamentally, I believe that enterprise, hyperscale, and what we and hashtag 039 re-witnessing from a chip viewpoint are all stronger than we believed 3 or 4 weeks ago. However, we and hashtag 039 re-seeing more and more talk about valuation, stretch, and little white knuckles in the tech industry as that tenure continues to rise. I would like to hear what you have to say. This is what I and hashtag 039 am hearing from traders that I and hashtag 039 am speaking with. They simply feel that because of this significant uptick, the streets suddenly have a religious value. You know, I believe that Fed Governor Lisa Cook made the same statement, stating that everything is perfectly priced. From point on, things must proceed well. Am I listening to that correctly? Because, as I recall, a few months ago, many were simply saying, end quote, value, what and hashtag 039's the point, end quote, this is a bull market, as you usually say. There is an industrial revolution going on. Are these valuations important to anyone? This has never happened before, blah, blah. Are investors telling you that valuation is the problem as well, or are they suggesting that perhaps some of these stories are coming to an end? When it comes to earnings, I believe the main concern is whether these companies can generate at a level that is commensurate with the prices at which these equities are trading. In my opinion, many tech companies are underestimating their growth this year by 15% to 20%. Over the next 18 months, I believe some of them, like Nvidia, may even see a 30% increase. Valuation will therefore be the point of contention in the near future. However, if you take a basic look at how these things are unfolding, I believe that some of the investors and traders are just worried that some of these things happened too quickly. Frank, however, this reminds me of a lot of things, such as November 23rd and possibly a couple of times in the middle of 24, not just Tokyo Black Monday, but before that, I and hashtag 039 am just stating that we and hashtag 039 we've been here before in terms of these kinds of strange occasions. Okay. Thus, one factor is bunions. To be honest, there have also been some inquiries. Since I and hashtag 039 am only speaking to investors, I was asking you a question for which I had a partial response. A few of these stories have collapsed. For instance, if you look at Apple, you can see that there was a Moffett-Nathanson downgrade on January 7th, recall that downgrading, do you? Of course, yes. Yes. The laundry list is where Moffett-Nathanson just kind of hit it. For example, Apple Intelligence could not be exactly what it has been advertised to be due to issues in China. They simply continued to make the point that all of Apple Intelligence and hashtag 039's profits had already been priced in. They simply continued on and on. Since then, I and hashtag 039 we've been looking at Nvidia. That and hashtag 039's just a time span that I and hashtag 039 am using to pin things. Since then, Nvidia has dropped more than 11%. Well, certain things Dawn and hashtag 039 appear to be going so well. Additionally, that somewhat aligns with CES, which you mentioned earlier. You were in the location where Jensen Huang talked. No one was blown away. They simply weren't and hashtag 039 impressed. The robotics narrative didn't and hashtag 039 impress them. The desktop and the supercomputer didn't and hashtag 039 blow them away. In other words, are you concerned that investors are simply less excited than they once were? I recall leaving Tassad Robert Tax today, you know. Wasn't and hashtag 039 it considered a catastrophe. And then, when we and hashtag 039, sitting there, a month and a half away, you see what TASAD has done since Trump takes office. The idea is that these things change quickly. It always boils down to the basics, such as the 15-to-1 demand for Nvidia chips. It appears that the demand story is staying the same. Because Jensen spent an hour and a half sitting there without going into detail about some of the short-term issues. Look, that will just be the response. On the basis of fundamentals, however, I think it will be demonstrated that it likely has $550 to $6 earnings power. For this reason, I believe that the video is worth $180 to $200. Rome was not created overnight in the case of Apple. This was not going to happen in a day. Craig, Moffin, the downgrading, and some of the others are things I understand. In my opinion, from the standpoint of the customer, it and hashtag 039, the largest install in the world. Apple will be at the forefront of the consumer AI revolution. Even in his criticism of Cook on the Rogan podcast, Zuck essentially implied that they had control over it. We want to be let in, just like us. In actuality, it appears that Apple will not let them entry. Simply put, our entire bullish outlook is that 25% of global customers will have access to AI through Apple over the next 12, 18, and 24 months. About 300 million people receive an upgrade in 4 years during the upgrade cycle. All right. I simply want to make sure you know about this. In your opinion, does Mark Zuckerberg have any merit in his criticism of the lack of innovation? Was there any truth to what he said, after all? He certainly has a point though. And I believe that some of the frustration may be expressed when discussing downgrades or some of Apple and hashtag 039's drawbacks. Because they have lagged behind, despite having 1.5 billion iPhones, 2.3 billion iOS devices, and innovation. They therefore require OpenAI. If not, they would have completed it on their own. That and hashtag 039. Why I think the upcoming year will be a big, tested time for Cupertino to demonstrate that innovation, whether it and hashtag 039, the iPhone 17, the upcoming Apple Intelligence version or other gadgets, is showing, Don and hashtag 039, forget about us. Additionally, I believe Zach makes some valid comments. Well, because I really pulled up a note I was reading before, I would like to clarify my position. This is a portion of what they stated. They acknowledged that Apple was in fact in the forefront of the AI race, even if it took them some time to get there. They came to the conclusion that Apple had already completely priced in its success in AI. To be clear, they think Apple was at the back. Additionally, they believe that the excitement about Apple Intelligence has already been factored into the stock price, which is $1.88. Frank, though, I would add this, and quote, look, this has been hated and you and hashtag 039, talked about it a lot on your show, and this has been hated for the last $2 trillion market cap move on Apple, end quote. This is true not just of MAFA and others. Since Apple does not undervalue its services or install base, I do think the street has undervalued Apple and hashtag 039's price alone. Was going to get this. Regarding the rising dollar, it has made a significant upward rise, gaining by almost 1.5% over the past week. We just discussed the possible impact on earnings throughout our 5 or 6 conversations. When it comes to earnings, which firms in the megacap tech space do you think are most at risk from the dollar and hashtag 039's rise? You know, from a dollar viewpoint, you and hashtag 039 see that component in the guidance. Microsoft, Oracle, and Apple are some of the major ones that will be revealed plainly. Captured roughly 100 BIP, assuming a headwind from now until 2025. Okay, it and hashtag 039's almost too late. In reality, you and hashtag 039 at the airport. You must board a plane. I had to finish some work. If you have any final thoughts, we and hashtag 039 take the final word. Glass thoughts is that we anticipated adversity like this as we approached the age of 25. Fundamentally, nothing changes. We believe that the bull market is only halfway over. And once it all comes together, I believe they are simply the chances to acquire that basket. That and hashtag 039 SR kind of strategy. When CEO Jensen Huang gave his keynote address at CES a week ago, he was rather enthusiastic and stated that, despite supply chain problems, demand for the Blackwell chip, which they have already begun shipping, still exceeded supply. Therefore, that could be an issue when it comes to their wages. Additionally, Day 1 and hashtag 039 T start making money until the middle of February. So remember that. However, there was some bearish activity. Since there is a lot of call activity today, some bulls are purchasing calls on this decline. However, the 130 strike puts from the February monthly cycle caught my attention the most. 10,000 of those were purchased by the trader, who paid an average debit of almost $6.80. For the following 39 days, that break-even point is 123.20. It is roughly 7% less than Nvidia and hashtag 039's current share price. Therefore, whether the stock is up or down, we usually see a lot of call activity in Nvidia every day. Since you and hashtag 039 we're going to be capturing that earnings event here, and Nvidia has been under constant pressure since those all-time highs only a week ago, this one kind of stood out to me. Yes, and as you can see, both bulls and bears are profitable. I mean, that and hashtag 039's the bearish side of things, and we and hashtag 039v seen this coming off, but the pigs are also excessively greedy. You stated 13%, which is down more than 10% from the highs to your position in corrective area. Palantir is much the same. In a relatively short time, that has dropped from about $85 to $63 in value.